Ohiopyle means white frothy water, and Youghiogheny means river that runs in a roundabout course. And both of those are derivations of Iroquois words. They're kind of the Americanized version of what the native words were. The first known settlers to this area are believed to be the Monongahela Indians. They were in this area. We know they were here around the early 1600s. They disappeared from the area at that time. Settlement was difficult for native tribes just as it was difficult for European settlers that came to this area. They didn't settle here to a great degree because it was a difficult area to get to. Imagine trying to float your canoe that you made out of a poplar tree down the Youghiogheny River. Probably wasn't going to be an easy trip.
Today we ride around in automobiles and we fly. Those days it was either walk or horses or horse-drawn carriages and wagons. The wagons were big, bulky, heavy. There were no real roads. They were just narrow roads cut by the armies as they came forth. And because of that, it was rutted and many times getting stuck and very difficult travel.
And it was still the western frontier. It was wild lands with many uncertainties about safety and what people were going to do once they did get here.
First things they had to do to clear land, they had to cut timber. Didn't have the chainsaws and things we have today, not even the two-man saw. They used axes. And so clearing that land was tough, it was difficult, and they began doing things, making use of those natural resources.
They say that a squirrel could travel from the East Coast to the Mississippi without ever touching the ground. And there were huge, vast forests here that were tapped for people's use. First thing they did, many of them were immigrants and farmers, and the first thing they had to do was clear the land.
George Washington came here on his first, he had been in Pennsylvania surveying, but in this area came to the confluence area where the three rivers up there meet, and he was hoping, he thought about building a fort, but then he decided to travel on down the river and try and find a water course that he could take clear to Pittsburgh. This, of course, was okay until he reached where today the present Ohiopyle is at our falls. And at this area, he discovered the falls were much harder and the rapids just impossible to travel with the type of boating that they had in those days.
Tom Fawcett was one of the men who fought with General Braddock. It's reported that Tom Fawcett actually murdered General Braddock after having a disagreement as to how the fight was to be done.
The militias in the different countries fought in a line and stood up and shot at each other. Well, when the French and Indian War began, Native Americans didn't fight that way. But General Braddock still felt that that was the way to fight, and some of his men thought that perhaps they should try some of the Native American tactics.
It's also reported that Tom Fawcett, being the town drunk, told these stories in the local bars in Ohiopyle where he lived.
The story of whiskey and moonshine in this area really talks about the toughness of people who lived here. The reason people made moonshine was because they couldn't get their crops to market if they tried to do it without distilling them. It was perfectly acceptable. It was an accepted way to make money, and people in the government realized that if they wanted people to settle the western frontier, which is what we were, they had to allow people to get their crops to market by distilling them. There were lots of things being produced here, from wagon wheels to whiskey barrels and things like that, but there was not a good way to get them out of town. Initially, the railroad came here because it was the new means of travel, and the B&O Railroad was the first railroad that came here in the late 1800s. And when it came here, it was a great thing.
The railroad really opened up and changed Ohiopyle forever. Up until the railroad reached Ohiopyle, it really was an isolated settlement, probably characteristic of many settlements along river gorges where you have a sawmill on a tributary taking advantage of that area. If you have a small flat, it could be some small hill farming going on. But when the railroad came in, all of a sudden settlement patterns changed, and changed dramatically.
Pittsburgh was a steel town, and we wouldn't have had Pittsburgh being the great steel town if it wasn't for Fayette County, which is the county that the park is in. There were over 90 patch towns in Fayette County at the time of the Industrial Revolution, and most of those were centered around a coal mine and coke ovens, and coke is what is used to make steel. They needed basically baked coal to fire the steel industry, and we produced the vast majority of coal that ran Pittsburgh, and to some degree also the steel mills of Cleveland were produced here in Fayette County, and they traveled the railroad. Well, over time, that really had an impact on the water quality here.
Dating all the way back into the 20s, when Ohiopyle House and when Ferncliff Peninsula Hotel, or Ferncliff Hotel, was there, they had annual botanical seminars. There were botanists from all over the country that came here to Ohiopyle. They realized the beauty and the natural history qualities of the Youghiogheny Gorge area and began building a state park around that core area of Ferncliff.
Ohiopyle State Park was founded, really, the startings of it were in the 60s and early 70s. And back then, there was really a big goal for Pennsylvanians, and people across the country were really starting to get back outside. They took interest in spending money outside. They wanted to get outdoors and enjoy the outdoors. And so there was a big push in Pennsylvania to open state parks, and people found the Youghiogheny River and the Youghiogheny River Gorge. This was about the same time when boating was becoming really a new sport, and a lot of the innovations that have taken place in boating have happened here in Ohiopyle because we have this unique river, this unique system.
Actually learned to swim in the Youghiogheny River here over by the bridge. We would come here quite often. We'd come here 6-7 days a week. I grew up just outside of Ohiopyle, so on Chalk Hill, Ohiopyle Road, so I'm native to the area.
Well, I remember my dad way back when he would spend his summers here visiting his grandparents, and he'd said how all the kids jumped over the falls in those days.
There was no safety when I was a kid. You know, everybody just swam where they wanted to swim and boated where they wanted to boat and tubed where they wanted to tube, and over the falls and then under the falls and off the falls and everything.
It was so different before the rafting companies, before the companies really got serious and regulated. We would always, I mean, we would go from here to Collinsville in truck tubes, you know, at night.
There weren't any rules back then. We were kind of flying by the seat of our pants. There weren't any regulations. The park was here, but they were still trying to figure out just exactly what this rafting game was all about.
We were looking at trying to develop some sort of a more organized passage system so that people would be spread out better on the river and there wouldn't be so much congestion in various rapids.
This park was kind of like set aside in time. When they first designed the park, they were going to have ski resorts here and golf courses, and you know, a chain hotel was going to be built in town. Then they decided, you know, the Commonwealth made a conscientious decision not to develop parks.
Well, when Bob took over working for the Conservancy, it was before they had taken the first 2 streets down here. And he was in charge of, you know, tearing all those buildings and everything down. There was a lot of people that was very upset about all this. They didn't want to give up their farms. It wasn't a good time then, you know. There were a lot of people very mad about it.
The infrastructure from '72 on was being added, sort of piecemeal. And there was a master plan for the park, but it was continuously being adapted and changed as the whitewater boating industry was putting pressure on the facility, as well as camping and the Kentuck campground was growing towards the late '70s and early '80s.
There was a master plan that had been developed for the park, you know, by consultants and what have you, and that included a bike trail, and the bike trail was a key thing that would provide the opportunity for everyday people of all ages to be able to see the park and experience the natural wonders of the Youghiogheny River Gorge.
Instantly, it was a hit. People were coming and and deciding that they're going to hike and bicycle along this great rail trail that provided access to the Youghiogheny River Gorge. Up until that time, it was only accessible via boat, and it was a whitewater trip on the lower Yaugh and a lower level whitewater trip on the middle Yaugh. So the bike trail really transformed the park too, and that led to a whole stream of park improvements, to parking, and to trail maintenance itself, and looking at those 100-year-old railroad structures and figuring out how to manage them properly. That railroad and what became the Great Passage wasn't even part of the original master plan, and yet today in 2008, bicycle usage along the trail within the park is greater than whitewater boating on the lower and the middle Yaugh. So we've really gone through a transformational process. The commercial activity within the park, the visitation, both overnight visitation and day use visitation, was overwhelming.
Along with the state park, of course, came many more visitors. The only time we had visitors was on Sunday.
To me, it was the best thing that could have happened. I mean, bringing 2 million people through here every summer is an amazing thing, because Ohiopyle's not easy to get to. You gotta want to get here.
Yeah, it may not be the wilderness anymore, but you get the feeling when you're here that you could be, 300 miles from the Hudson Bay up in Canada. It's the same type of, when you see the firs and the pines like we have here, it's the same environment you see up there.
And we have a giant park. Ohiopyle State Park is over 19,000 acres. However, we have a big chunk of it that is inaccessible. Still, not that we need to have parking lots and trailheads everywhere. Part of the beauty of the resource is, it presents a wild sort of profile. The bottom line is we have consistent, incredible whitewater 365 days a year here. If you're a kayaking enthusiast, you don't need to go to Colorado. Colorado has whitewater for about 8 weeks a year. We have whitewater here every day of the year. You won't get bored, and you will always be challenged.
The river is probably in the best shape now that I think it's been since they started mining coal. They even have the aquatic life now is restored to the point, I don't think it's been this good since the 1800s.
I see Ohiopyle State Park as one, not one of, as the most important natural history park in western Pennsylvania. By far the best.
A lot of parks offer great recreational venues, but they don't have the diversity of flora and fauna and geology that you would find in one of the larger resource-based parks. Ohiopyle, to me, had it all.
These waterfalls and these ridges in here, the way this corridor flows, is some of the most breathtaking views that you'll find anywhere in the east coast of the United States. Bachman Rock overlook, I think, is one of the nicest overlooks that I've seen anywhere.
When you come down there, down Meadow Run, past Meadow Run, and see the falls, that's amazing to me.
There's not a person that goes rafting with us wouldn't die to have a house in Ohiopyle. They love it here. People do. It's got everything.
There's something for the campers. There's something for the bikers, the hikers, for the historians, with everything in the area, from Fort Necessity to Frank Lloyd Wright's places. The beauty of it, the people. The people are so friendly and open.
You can walk in the streets all hours of the night and day. You can walk, you can hike, you can bike. You can go to the river and just sit and read a book. You can go fishing in Meadow Run.
For the natural beauty and the history here, you just have to come to this Ohiopyle area.